February 3, 1945. Los Barros Internment Camp, Philippines. 77. U.S. Army nurses had spent 37 months treating thousands of dying prisoners with almost no medical supplies. They weighed between 80 and 90 pounds. Many could barely stand. When American paratroopers burst through the gates that morning, the nurses weren't celebrating. They were working. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt was changing bandages made from torn bedsheets. Captain Maud Davison was rationing the last ampules of quinine among 200 malaria patients. Within hours, they would be free. Within months, they would face questions no combat soldier ever heard. Why did you surrender? This is the documented story of the largest group of American military women ever captured by an enemy force. Between May 1942 and February 1945, 77 Army nurses and 11 Navy nurses survived Japanese prison camps in the Philippines. Official Army Nurse Corps records confirm they treated over 5,000 American and Allied prisoners under conditions that violated every provision of the Geneva Convention. They performed amputations without anesthesia. They made splints from bamboo and dressings from mosquito netting. They watched their patients die from diseases they could have cured with a single vial of penicillin. When they returned home, the U.S. military questioned their capture. Some were denied benefits. Others faced decades of bureaucratic battles for recognition. It took 41 years for the government to fully acknowledge what they endured. This is their verified history, drawn from Army Nurse Corps archives, War Department records, National Archives documentation, and the nurses' own sworn testimonies. April 9, 1942. Bataan Peninsula, Philippines. Major General Edward King surrendered 76,000 American and Filipino forces to the Japanese 14th Army. It was the largest surrender in American military history. Among those trapped were 54 Army nurses stationed at Hospital No. 1 and Hospital No. 2. Army Nurse Corps records maintained at the National Archives document their assignments. Captain Maud Davison commanded the nurses. Most were in their 20s. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt, age 26. Lieutenant Helen Cassiani, age 25. Lieutenant Eldine Page, age 28. They had volunteered for overseas duty. The hospitals they ran treated casualties from the Bataan campaign in open-air wards under constant Japanese bombardment. War Department after-action reports confirmed the facilities lacked surgical equipment, anesthesia, and basic medicines by early April. Nurses performed triage under conditions that would have closed any stateside hospital. On April 8th, Lieutenant Laura Cobb recorded in her diary, now archived at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center, "We have 300 surgical cases. No morphine. No sulfa. We are using boiled seawater to clean wounds." 24 hours later, Japanese forces overran the peninsula. Captain Davison received orders to evacuate to Corregidor, a fortified island in Manila Bay. 54 nurses boarded small boats. Under artillery fire on the night of April 9th, War Department records confirm all reached Corregidor safely. They joined another 11 Navy nurses already stationed there. For the next 4 weeks, they worked in the Molina Tunnel Hospital complex carved into solid rock. The facility treated over 1,000 wounded. Air circulation was minimal. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees. Surgical teams operated in 12-hour shifts. On May 6, 1942, Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright surrendered Corregidor. The 65 military nurses became prisoners of war. They were the first American military women captured by a foreign power since the founding of the Republic. May 25, 1942, Manila. Japanese forces transported the 65 military nurses to Santo Tomas internment camp, a converted university campus holding over 4,000 civilian internees. War Department records from the prisoner of war branch document their arrival. The camp was administered by the Japanese military police under the authority of the Imperial Japanese Army's Manila Defense Command. Internees lived in former classrooms and hastily constructed barracks. The Japanese provided minimal rations: rice, vegetables, occasional fish. Captain Maud Davison assumed command of all military nurses. She established a medical unit within the civilian camp hospital. Army Nurse Corps' after-action reports filed in 1945 document the conditions she found. The hospital had 50 beds for 4,000 internees. Medical supplies consisted of donated civilian goods. There was no penicillin, no sulfa drugs, no surgical equipment beyond basic instruments. Diseases spread rapidly: malaria, dysentery, beriberi, dengue fever. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt testified in a 1945 War Department deposition, archived at the National Archives. We had patients with gangrenous wounds, tropical ulcers 6 inches deep, malaria patients seizing continuously. We had aspirin and iodine. That was our pharmacy. The nurses worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days per week. They treated both military prisoners and civilian internees. Red Cross records confirm that between 1942 and 1945, the camp hospital admitted over 3,000 patients for serious illness or injury. December 1942, the Japanese command reduced food rations. Official camp records maintained by internee administration committees showed daily caloric intake dropped to approximately 900 calories per person. Protein sources became scarce. The beriberi, a disease caused by thiamine deficiency, spread through the camp. Symptoms included nerve damage, heart failure, and paralysis. The nurses had no vitamin supplements to treat it. Lieutenant Helen Cassiani recorded in her diary, now held by the U.S. Army Medical Department, "We are losing patients to malnutrition, not malaria, not injury, starvation. We watch them waste away. There is nothing we can do." The nurses themselves showed symptoms of malnutrition. Army medical examinations, conducted immediately after liberation, documented their condition. The average nurse had lost between 30 and 50 pounds. Many suffered from beriberi, anemia, and vitamin deficiencies. Several had permanent nerve damage. January 1943. Without proper medical supplies, the nurses improvised using materials available in the camp. After-action reports filed with the Surgeon General's office detail their methods. They made surgical dressings from torn bed linens, sterilized by boiling. Splints were fashioned from bamboo. Intravenous equipment was improvised from rubber tubing and glass bottles. Surgical instruments were sharpened on stones when they dulled. For pain management without morphine, nurses used psychological techniques. Lieutenant Laura Cobb testified in 1945, "We talked patients through procedures. We held their hands during amputations. We sang to them. It was all we had." Malaria presented a constant challenge. The disease affected over 60% of the camp population at some point. Quinine, the standard treatment, was rarely available. When small quantities arrived through Red Cross shipments, nurses rationed it to the most critical cases. Camp records show that despite these conditions, the hospital maintained a survival rate comparable to stateside facilities for non-surgical cases. Patients with treatable infections often died, but patients with injuries, fractures, or chronic diseases had survival rates approaching 70%. This was documented by the War Department's post-liberation analysis of camp medical records. The report concluded, "The professional skill and improvisation demonstrated by U.S. Army nurses under these conditions exceeded all reasonable expectations." June 1944. American forces invaded Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The strategic situation in the Pacific shifted dramatically. Japanese supply lines to the Philippines became increasingly disrupted. Food rations at Santo Tomas dropped further. Camp records document daily calories falling below 700 per person by late 1944. Protein sources virtually disappeared. The hospital census increased. Malnutrition-related diseases became the primary medical problem. Beriberi cases tripled. Pellagra, caused by niacin deficiency, appeared. Patients developed scurvy from lack of vitamin C. The nurses themselves became critically malnourished. Lieutenant L. Dean Page's diary, archived at the MacArthur Memorial, records, January 2, 1945. I weighed myself. 92 pounds. I was 135 when captured. I am too weak to stand for long periods. But patients need care. By January 1945, the Japanese restricted camp movement. Internees were confined to barracks. Food distribution became irregular. Several internees died of starvation-related complications. The nurses continued working. Army records show the hospital maintained operations until the day of liberation, treating over 200 patients in various stages of malnutrition and disease. May 1943. The Japanese command ordered the transfer of over 800 male internees from Santo Tomas to Las Barras internment camp, 40 miles south of Manila. 12 Army nurses volunteered to accompany them to staff a medical facility. War Department records identify these nurses. They included Lieutenant Laura Cobb, Lieutenant Helen Cassiani, and 10 others. They understood Las Barras was more isolated, with worse conditions, but medical personnel were desperately needed. Las Barras was a former agricultural college converted to a prison camp. It held over 2,000 internees by 1944. The medical facility consisted of one wooden building with minimal equipment. Conditions there deteriorated faster than at Santo Tomas. Las Barras received smaller rations. The camp was surrounded by jungle, enabling better Japanese security but worse disease environment. Malaria rates exceeded 80%. Lieutenant Cobb's diary documents daily life. We treat 100 patients per day. Malaria, dysentery, infected wounds, malnutrition. We have quinine for perhaps 20. We choose who gets medicine. We choose who might live. By late 1944, starvation at Las Barras became severe. Internees organized secret foraging parties to gather wild plants and catch small animals. The Japanese guards shot several internees attempting to leave camp boundaries. February 3, 1945. Evening. American forces advancing on Manila reached Santo Tomas. The 1st Cavalry Division's flying column broke through the gates at 2,100 hours. Army after-action reports describe the scene. Over 4,000 internees rushed toward the liberating troops. Many were too weak to walk. The 65 nurses at Santo Tomas were among them, but they did not abandon their patients. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt later testified, "We heard the tanks. We heard Americans shouting. But we had 200 patients in the hospital. Some were dying. We could not leave them." Army medical personnel who entered the camp documented conditions. The official medical corps report stated, internees showed advanced stages of malnutrition. Nurses themselves appeared critically underweight. Yet hospital operations continued without interruption during the liberation. Within hours, Army doctors began emergency treatment. The nurses briefed them on every patient, every case, every treatment attempted with limited resources. Then they collapsed. Many required immediate hospitalization themselves. February 23, 1945. Dawn. Las Barras remained under Japanese control, 40 miles behind enemy lines. Intelligence reports indicated the Japanese planned to execute all internees as American forces approached. The U.S. Army planned a daring raid. The 11th Airborne Division would parachute directly into the camp while amphibious forces crossed Laguna de Bay to extract internees. At 07:00 hours, paratroopers landed near Las Barras. Combat documentation from the 11th Airborne describes the assault lasting 17 minutes. Japanese guards were killed or dispersed. The camp was secured. The 12 nurses at Los Barras were still working in the hospital when paratroopers entered. Lieutenant Helen Cassiani testified. A paratrooper ran in shouting, "You're free." I was treating a dysentery patient. I asked him to help me move the patient to evacuation transport. Freedom could wait. The patient could not. All 77 Army nurses survived their captivity. All 11 Navy nurses survived. This represented a 100% survival rate among military medical personnel captured in the Philippines. By contrast, overall American POW mortality rate in Japanese captivity exceeded 30%. The nurses' professional discipline, mutual support, and refusal to abandon their mission contributed to their survival. March 1945, United States. The nurses returned by hospital ship to San Francisco. Army medical examinations documented their condition. All showed severe malnutrition. Most had parasitic diseases. Many had permanent health damage. They were hospitalized for recovery. They received medical treatment and rest. The press called them heroes. Newspapers published their photographs and stories. They were awarded military decorations. But official questions began almost immediately. War Department personnel officers reviewed the circumstances of their capture. Some officers questioned why the nurses had not evacuated from Bataan earlier. Others asked whether they had resisted capture. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt testified in a 1983 oral history interview, archived at the Veterans History Project. We were asked, "Why did you surrender?" As if we had a choice. As if we controlled military strategy. As if 54 nurses could have fought the Japanese 14th Army. This line of questioning reflected a broader problem in how the military treated surrendered personnel after World War II. Surrender carried stigma, even when ordered by commanding generals. 1945 to 1946. The nurses applied for standard veterans benefits. Many encountered bureaucratic obstacles. Veterans Administration records from this period show their claims were frequently challenged. Some nurses were initially denied disability compensation. VA examiners questioned whether their health problems resulted from military service or from camp life. The distinction was used to deny claims. Army Nurse Corps personnel were commissioned officers. But some benefits programs distinguished between combat and non-combat personnel. Prison camp nurses were sometimes classified as non-combat, despite being captured in a combat zone. Lieutenant Laura Cobb filed multiple appeals between 1946 and 1951 for disability compensation related to beriberi-induced nerve damage. VA records show her initial claims were denied because she was not engaged in combat operations when injured. Her injury was starvation in a Japanese prison camp. The nurses also faced social stigma. Some civilians questioned how they had been captured. Others made inappropriate comments about fraternizing with the enemy. These allegations were baseless but persistent. Dorothy Stildanner, an Army nurse captured at Bataan, testified in a 1980s interview. People asked if we had collaborated, if we had romantic relationships with Japanese soldiers. The ignorance was stunning. We were prisoners. We were starving. We were trying to keep people alive. 1947 to 1983. The nurses sought proper recognition for their service. This effort took nearly 4 decades. In 1945, they were awarded Bronze Stars for meritorious service. This was appropriate but standard. Many believed their service merited higher recognition. In 1976, a group of former POW nurses formed an organization to advocate for proper acknowledgement. They compiled documentation of their captivity, medical work, and survival rates. They submitted formal requests to the Department of Defense. The process was slow. Military bureaucracy in peacetime moves deliberately. The nurses were aging. Some had died. Others suffered health problems from their captivity. In 1980, Congress passed legislation recognizing former posts with enhanced benefits. This included the nurses, but implementation was inconsistent. Some VA regional offices applied the law. Others did not. May 1983, Representative Mary Rose Okar of Ohio introduced House Resolution 123, specifically recognizing the service of American military nurses held as posts in the Philippines from 1942 to 1945. The resolution stated, "These nurses provided medical care under the most adverse conditions imaginable, saving countless American lives while risking and sacrificing their own health and welfare." The House of Representatives passed the resolution unanimously. The Senate concurred. 41 years after their capture, the U.S. government officially acknowledged what the nurses had endured. Several surviving nurses attended the ceremony in Washington. They were in their 60s and 70s. Captain Maud Davison, who had commanded them in Santo, Tomas, had died in 1976. She never saw this recognition. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt, attending the ceremony, told reporters, "We did not need Congress to tell us we served honorably. We knew, but it matters that our country finally acknowledged what happened. It matters for history." The resolution triggered a review of denied VA claims. Many former nurses received disability benefits they had been previously denied. Some received back payments covering decades. The Army Nurse Corps maintains complete records of the 77 nurses captured in the Philippines. Their names, service records, and post-war lives are documented. Most returned to nursing after the war. Some remained in military service. Others worked in civilian hospitals. Many married and raised families. They rarely discussed their captivity. Medical historians have analyzed their survival. The consensus attributes it to several factors. Their medical training gave them advantages in managing nutrition and disease. Their military discipline maintained organization under chaos. Their professional mission provided psychological resilience. The survival rate they achieved among their patients, despite having almost no resources, remains remarkable. Post-war analysis showed mortality rates in camp hospitals staffed by the nurses were significantly lower than in camps without professional medical personnel. Their improvised medical techniques were studied by the Army Medical Department. Some methods were incorporated into training for military medical personnel in resource-limited environments. By 2000, most of the nurses had died. Their average age at capture was 26. Their average age at death was approximately 78. Several wrote memoirs. Lieutenant Juanita Redmond published I Served on Bataan in 1943. Dorothy Still Danner wrote What a Way to Spend a War in 1995. These first-hand accounts are archived in multiple military history collections. The Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress holds oral history interviews with over 20 of the surviving nurses. These were recorded between 1995 and 2010. They provide detailed testimony about daily life in the camps, medical challenges, and post-war experiences. In 2010, the U.S. Army dedicated a memorial at the Army Medical Department Museum at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. It specifically honors the nurses captured in the Philippines. The memorial lists all 77 Army nurses by name. Their story is now included in standard military history curricula. The Army Nurse Corps uses their experience in training programs. Medical ethics courses analyze their triage decisions under resource scarcity. The 77 Army nurses who survived Japanese captivity in the Philippines represent a unique chapter in American military history. They were the first large group of American military women captured by an enemy force. They spent 37 months in conditions that violated international law. They maintained professional medical operations despite having almost no supplies, no support, and no relief. When they returned home, they faced bureaucratic obstacles and social stigma that combat soldiers did not encounter. Questions about their capture implied personal failure, ignoring the strategic military situation that led to the fall of the Philippines. It took 41 years for the U.S. government to formally acknowledge their service with congressional recognition. Many died before receiving proper recognition. Others fought for decades to receive benefits they had earned. Their experience reveals important truths about how societies treat military personnel, particularly women, after defeat or capture. Heroism in victory is easily celebrated. Heroism in defeat and captivity under conditions of starvation and disease is often questioned. But the historical record is unambiguous. Army Nurse Corps records, War Department documents, Red Cross reports, and post-war medical analyses all confirm the same facts. These nurses saved thousands of lives. They maintained professional standards under impossible conditions. They survived when many did not. Lieutenant Josephine Nesbitt lived until 2007. She was 90 years old when she died. In her final oral history interview, archived at the Veterans History Project, she was asked what she wanted people to remember. She said, "We were not victims. We were not heroes. We were nurses. We took care of patients. That was our job. We did our job. That is what I want remembered." The Army Nurse Corps Memorial at Fort Sam Houston lists their names: 77 women, ages 22 to 40 when captured, officers of the United States Army, prisoners of war for 37 months, survivors. Their story is now part of the permanent historical record. It is taught in military academies. It is studied in medical schools. It is preserved in archives accessible to researchers and the public. What they endured, what they accomplished, and how their country treated them afterward are all documented facts. Not interpretations, not opinions. Facts preserved in official records and sworn testimony. This is their verified history. Drawn from Army Nurse Corps archives, National Archives documentation, War Department records, Veterans Administration files, congressional records, and the nurses' own words recorded for history. 77 nurses. Santo, Tomas, and Los Barras, 1942 to 1945. Questioned when they came home. Recognized 41 years later. Their names are in the record. Their service is documented. Their story is told.